I'm Elaine. I work in the office, and I agree with both Lorraine and Diane. I'd like to learn a lot more than I already know.
And I'm Peggy Moore, and I'm mainly joining in because the topic, of course, is interesting, but Diane Alexanderson recommended it, and I have great respect for her. So,
thank you. I'm glad you could join us. And then Sally, we'll start with you and go around if that's all right.
Yes, my name is Sally Seaton. I'm a friend of Diane's, but I come from Pleasantville United Church of Christ in Champagne. And I just feel that, wow, there's so many things to worry about in this world, but I often think that this is the most devastating to humanity. So I'm interested in what my little piece is that would be suggested that I can do. I do my things at home, but as a community.
I'm Diane Alexanderson, and I remember when this came out years ago, but I didn't read it. And in beginning to read it, it's just concise, to the point, and so important.
And I'm Bev Joasak, and I'm excited to continue reading. So far, what I've learned, it puts it in a very good perspective, and I am excited to continue and then hear the discussions.
Good evening. I'm Heather Haberly. I'm Beverly's daughter. Great to be with you all. I have always found the dialogue in all of the classes here at DPC to be fascinating, so I'm really looking forward to learning from you. And I too want to know how I can engage the community to address this really pressing issue.
Thanks so much, Heather. My name is Greg. So I serve as moderator of the Peace and Justice Committee, which is the committee at DPC that brought this, as well as adult ed, to the table. And I read this, my father-in-law, who is a Catholic in Canada, brought this book down on a visit a number of years back. I was telling Mark earlier, so it's been probably 5 years since I've read through it. So I'm excited to read through it again, and really most excited to hear what you all bring to the conversation.
I'm Mark Vandersall, member of DPC here. I'm on the Peace and Justice Committee with Greg. I'm also moderator of adult ed here. And I just view this whole issue of climate change as a very, very, very serious issue for globally, for everyone, particularly for poorer communities that are threatened by climate change. And I have a confession, I'm a retired chemist. So you could either view that as, oh, you're the source of the problem, or the way I prefer to view it is chemists, I think, can play a key role into helping solve some of these issues. So I'm very interested to see what the church has to say and get into some ideas, hopefully.
My name is Scott Nichols. I am a member of DPC also. This is such a critical subject today and on into the future. I kind of can't come up with a more critical subject. So obviously, hearing what people have to say, I have glanced through this encyclical. Obviously, I haven't read the whole thing. And there's an awful lot in it. I'm a little concerned that there's some things that aren't in it, but in any case, I think it's such a critical subject for this time. Thank you.
I'm Kay Road. I'm a member of the Peace and Justice Committee. And this is such a critical thing that we are dealing with. And I'm just excited about the interest that this is drawing and about this book. It's very concise and very well put.
I'm Bill Road, and I'm also a member of the Peace and Justice Committee here at DPC. And as soon as I started reading this, I was so impressed with the time that Pope Francis must have spent, how educated he is, and how enlightened he can present ideas and points of view. And I'm very, very concerned that even I've had some science, and not as much chemistry as Mark, but a lot of science and math. And I hope to be able to work with people and share ideas and learn from them as we try to proceed down a path that is going to open up ideas for solutions rather than create additional problems. And I think there are different ways to look at the problem of climate crisis. And sometimes the solutions we get make other things worse, as is pointed out very clearly in the book. So I'm hopeful to be able to learn from that and help to work with others if we can help move ideas forward to seats of power that will maybe change the way they look at things and climate crisis problem.
Dave Boudet, member of DPC, and I'm here because when I looked at this book, I was most impressed, especially after reading the first chapter. But throughout my life, I can't think of issues more critical, more major than this. I mean, we talk about racism and equality and helping the poor, which is right up there also. But this, if we lose our planet and our atmosphere, I just want to learn more about what I can do as an individual, my family and I, besides consuming less and recycling every chance I get, what I can do as an individual, as a family member, as a church member, community member, what can we do if we're not a big corporate chemical company or finding out ways to help in terms of the environment. I just want to know what I can do. So I'm hoping to learn and get ideas from everyone here.
Hi, I'm Judy Tranquilli, and I'm a member of the Peace and Justice Committee as well. When Greg first brought this up, I immediately, of course, thought it was a fabulous idea. I mean, for all the reasons that he said about how critical the issue was. But I thought it was fascinating to me that the Pope would choose to take this on. And I'm not familiar with the Catholic Church's tradition with encyclical, so I just haven't been paying attention perhaps. But I love it as an idea of like a call to us as a body of faith to act. And it would be great if this could be that clarion call. And even though we're not Roman Catholic, that we're Christians, we're all members of this global family, one humanity, as the encyclical itself says. And we have to work together, and time is a wasting. So let's get to it.
Excellent. Great to hear all those introductions and just the passion that you all bring to this. So really so excited and so thrilled. All right, so just in terms of format and how the discussions will go, I am merely a facilitator. I'm not here. I'm no expert in Catholic social teaching. It's again just a book that really interested me, and I'm similar to all of you. So I bring no expertise relating to this particular book or Pope Francis, anything like that. What I hope to do, even if you haven't done the reading, right, and even if you know people who want to attend Beyond Discussion Session 1, encourage them to join, because I'll try to provide at least a synopsis of each chapter. I've read through a couple of really good discussion guides, one that's put out by the Franciscans, who obviously have an interest in this. That's where Pope Francis, he took his name from St. Francis of Assisi. I had to look up his name before Pope Francis, and now I forget what it was, but it's Jorge Mario Bergoglio, if I'm saying that correctly. He's from Argentina, but took the name Pope Francis because of how influential St. Francis was in his own life. Let me find getting the door. Thank you so much. I'm trapped here with like all these wires, so I can't escape. So really, as facilitator, after providing just a brief synopsis of the intro in chapter 1 today, have a few questions that will facilitate discussion, but by all means, if we have questions of our own or things that you want to raise and address, that's what we're here to do. So really would encourage you to not be shy. That being said, if you're overly excited, just make sure that we give everybody a chance to participate. So try to keep, an hour and a half goes by fast, and so we'll try to keep conversation flowing. No need to raise hands, nothing like that. This is nothing formal, just we're communicating with one another. So I'm really, really quite excited to be part of this with you. And if there's anything as you're reading, if you have any questions even prior to these sessions that you want to send me ahead of time, feel free to do that as well. And that will just clue me in on what you're thinking through and what I might include in a future discussion. So we have 4 sessions. This is the first of 4. We'll meet each Wednesday from 6 to 7:30. And I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I'm fairly certain. So we're doing chapter 1 today, plus the intro, chapters 2 and 3 next week. And then we'll do chapters 4 and 5. And then we'll end with chapter 6 in the second week of February. So that's what will take us through. And if you didn't receive a copy of the book, we have some extras. I have 2 here. They're free. Peace and Justice was able to purchase them. So if you don't have one, make sure you get one before you. Does anybody, actually, for the conversation, does anybody want one now? Everybody has one. Want a copy? You need a copy? There you go. Yeah, can't say no to a free book. All right. As we discussed too, one thing to note is since you all have a copy of the book, it'll be helpful if you're referencing a passage, note that there's paragraph numbers. So that's a great way, even more than page numbers. And that's for those of you on Zoom here. Even if you have the online version, the paragraph numbers line up. And so that is, so that's what we'll reference if you have something that you want to quote. All right. And then the other thing, I just want to, by way of introduction, before we get to the introduction, the one thing that I find really helpful with this particular work is how Pope Francis situates the environment. And I think it's important that as we start, we're clear on what we mean by the environment, right? Like if we're going to say there's environmental degradation, I think we assume certain things about what the environment is, and we should be clear about what we mean when we say the environment. And so I think what Pope Francis does that I find helpful is he doesn't limit the environment just to materiality, like matter and energy. He says very clearly that the environment includes both the natural, the material order, right? Like that includes us, right? We are matter, but we're more than matter. And so is, the world, the cosmos, as being created by God. The environment is the medium of God's grace and includes the natural as well as the social component. And he even emphasizes, as you'll see in chapter 1 and beyond, kind of the social strategies are really what we need to tackle, right? Injustice is very much socially a social issue that needs to guide our thought and our attention. And so he will move, and you'll see this in the future chapters as he dives further into technology and the fact that we have to think beyond technology for a solution. Indeed, we can utilize technology, but something like a de-extinction project. I don't know if you've heard of this, but alongside genetic engineering, there's George Church's lab, or one of George Church's many ventures, he's a geneticist at Harvard, is to try to re-engineer the Asian elephant to be a woolly mammoth to terraform Siberia. And the idea there is that you can keep carbon sequestered by terraforming Siberia and preventing the plant loss that would cause the release of carbon in the atmosphere. So that's really interesting, right? But I think that it's trying to solve the problem with what's kind of a chief cause of the problem. That's what Pope Francis will say is we often look to these technical fixes, but it's going to do that at the cost of some of the social issues that we can ignore if we're just focused on the technical. So that's what I really like about his connection, the interconnection between natural and social. And just wanted to point that out so that we're not referencing the environment as something that kind of induces a nature-culture binary. We want to think of them as unified in humanity and non-human creation as well. Anything else you'd like to add to that? Any other ways that you have found helpful to think about the environment or ways that resonates with any of you?
I was surprised that the Pope put it as the issue so strong as that we're actually doing violence to the planet, to the environment, as if we were criminals. It's that serious. I was really startled when I read what We're killing ourselves, exactly.
What struck me related to, by the way, Bill, I totally agree with that point. That's definitely striking, and I think probably needed. We probably need to hear words like that from our leaders. But what I was going to remark on was sort of going back to your comment about the natural and the social, and that he tied intimately that you can't have environmental justice without the social justice side. Very much so, and then it's intimately linked. And for as much work as we're doing on Matthew 25 and thinking about racial justice, which is absolutely essential. But this whole aspect of what are we doing for our planet, and in doing so, what are we doing to the least among us globally, not only in our own community, but all around the world, without even a thought, that we just, I think in particular, it's such an, just reading the first chapter, it was such an indictment on capitalist and the consumerism culture that is so pervasive in first world countries, and it's true, we consume without a thought, and we're really consuming at the cost of many people in so many other countries that they don't have any kind of defense against the way we consume. So just really striking things.
I've heard one critic say it's easier, I forget who it was, but it's easier to envision the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Yeah. Right.
The claim of there's one that we see as really more
right.
Like we can't do it without.
Yeah, that's what he said here in chapter 56 about the deified market,
Yeah,
it's so true. It is so true, yeah. And that image too, I'm sorry, and then I'll stop really. That the whole thought about if everybody in the world consumed the way we did, there would be no place to put all the, just imagine, really, if every single human on this planet consumed the way, those of us in industrialized first world countries, whatever, consume, the world would have exploded already.
I think he used the word, the world would become just a big pile of filth.
Yes, yeah.
It's just so very hard words to hear.
Yeah.
We don't think of it that way. It's filth, it's wrong. It kept coming out to me, everything I read. Back on me.
There is another side to it, though, that he presents, which we need to see to be uplifted, because it gets so overwhelmingly depressing. And what can we do? I'm reading just the very last sentence in paragraph 12, and it said, rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise.
Yeah.
And just imagine if tomorrow morning, every person in the world could just for a few moments, think of the world that way, as a mystery, as something joyful, as something to be thankful for, and how we would act differently if that's the way we approach it.
Well, and what better example did we have of that than the spring of 2020, when we were all home? I think I've never witnessed a more beautiful spring. The birds were louder, the flowers were more vibrant, the grass was greener, because everything slowed. The sky was bluer for sure. And everything stopped for that period of time. And so it actually is possible. We can do it, but it will take tremendous change. And we've already stepped back from that glorious moment, but we can do it. And so I have to hold on to that. If not, I go crazy. Probable. Yeah.
Related to that though, sort of the corollary on the other side though was just a comment about how how we have driven to extinction already so many species of plant and animal and whatever, and that I can't remember where it was exactly about the world becoming gray and how much of the beauty, you know, has been lost because of our own actions, you know, in this consumerism culture. And so, yes, we can pause for a moment and enjoy the blue skies, but if you pause and think like, well, what's all the stuff that we missed because we, you know, because we destroyed it without a thought.
Yeah, we've been to Assisi, and when you hear some of the lectures about St. Francis, the Basilica, and how he preached sermons to the birds. And he called living things like a flower, he referred to them as brother or sister. I mean, so outlandish, we don't even think that way. But then you read the Bible and you see that consider the lilies of the field, that the king in all his glory is not as radiant as one of these. What's important, that's what you stop.
And really, when you stop and think about that lily, right, that taking that pause, it helps you remember the other things. But it's taking that first initial pause and that first initial notice, because then you'll notice the next and the next. And we do need to remind ourselves to take that pause every day, every hour. So true.
Well, in his introduction, these are absolutely themes that we'll return to. Behind me, I've put all of the key themes in chapter 1 that he addresses, and you can see we've already touched upon many of them. So we will come back to that. I didn't officially assign the introduction, so I'm not sure if you read it. But what he does, he's basically giving a shout out to previous, those who have influenced him. And what's really neat is he calls special attention to Patriarch Bartholomew, which represents the Eastern tradition. So kind of the Orthodox tradition. And he really was known as a key figure in promoting ecology and environment in his within Orthodoxy. He was a critical figure in that regard. So Pope Francis sheds special light on him. And I think part of that is as he's addressing all of humanity, right? Christians and non-Christians alike, saying this is something all of us have to be concerned about and to work toward. I think he's making an intentional effort to include what is often lost in the Western tradition, which is this whole other, Eastern Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, which interestingly is actually gaining a lot of popularity in America. Lots of Orthodox churches, the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America, and the Antiochian Orthodox churches. So just kind of interesting, and I'm not sure what's behind that. I think part of it might be that one of the things they focus on that we in the West don't as much is kind of the element of beauty, iconography. If you walk into an Orthodox cathedral, there's almost something more demanded of you. In the ones that I've been to and participated in service, they have that emphasis on kind of a sacramental ethos where they pay attention to not only the environment, but just beauty and mystery. Mystery is a main point of emphasis within Orthodoxy. So just think that's interesting and important for us to remember our brothers and sisters from the Eastern tradition as well. But after giving that kind of the compliments to those who have gone before him, he says, this is a concern that brings together the whole human family, and we do that to seek a sustainable and integral development. That's in paragraph 13. So that's important. This message is for everyone. And in order to seek sustainable and integral development. And then to the social realities we've been talking about, he says the intimate relationship between the poor. This is paragraph 16 rather. I will point to the intimate relationship between the poor and the fragility of the planet, the conviction that everything in the world is connected, the critique of new paradigms and forms of power derived from technology, the call to seek other ways of understanding the economy and progress, the value proper to each creature, the human meaning of ecology, the need for forthright and honest debate, the serious responsibility of international and local policy, the throwaway culture, and the proposal of a new lifestyle. These questions will not be dealt with once and for all, but reframed and enriched again and again. So the question relating to that is, which ones of all those themes that he listed at the end of paragraph 16, and some of you have already expressed that you see these issues as crucial, but are there any of those that he discusses in paragraph 16 that you find especially important as we think through what it means to tackle issues of environmental degradation generally and climate change more specifically?
I have a problem with, this throwaway society that we're in. I think that this country, especially because it's so huge, and we're just sprawling. And if you go to Europe, you don't see that. There are small villages and people stay within the confines of the village. And in this country, we really have to get a handle on, just because we're big and have all of this space around us doesn't mean we have to fill it. You know, and we're in a bit of a rut, I think. I'm not saying just this country, in general, countries of any kind of wealth. We're in this rut of consuming to the point where we don't need it, but we still consume it. And we consume our land, which means we consume our water supplies. We consume cities so that there's more. They just sprawl out further and further. So there's more and more waste that's happening. And that's a hard one because we live in Bucks County, and every time I do not think that it is my right to have any problem with selling of land. But let's look at our farms. They're all sprawling developments. I just, somewhere that's got to make a bit more sense to me, I think.
How much does your heart break to drive out the turnpike and to see all of the warehouses for the Amazon delivery trucks that have taken over all the farms there? And they're just behemoths. They're the biggest buildings I've ever seen.
Yes.
And there's so many of them. How could we possibly consume that much stuff that we need these warehouses along the road to deliver instantly whatever it is our 2 a.m. Amazon look at required of us? I mean, it's remarkable and it's so sad.
So that,
what can we do about it? I mean, seriously, what can you, I, or anyone here as an individual or even as a group, people, what can we do about that?
Give up an Amazon account, right? I mean, so that's serious. No, seriously. I mean, there's actually a challenge out there.
Open an account?
I beg your pardon?
What did you say? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
So
about
for
the Amazon
people
account.
who have Amazon Prime, so they can have free delivery of any product. So you don't get to do that one, but that's something I'm working on this year.
I'm living in 1950s. And Jackie Jensen playing for the Red Sox. Really. But I know what you're talking about. 'Cause I remember coming up to Doylestown back in the 50s when Easton Road, and later when things started to progress, it was 611, was a 2-lane highway. One northbound lane and one southbound lane. And it was all farmland between Willow Grove. I mean, there were some businesses and some homes along with, but there weren't developments. It was still essentially all farmland in that part of Montgomery and all of central Bucks. It's just mind blowing what's happened. The thing about Pope Francis, his intellect, his compassion, his passion, when he says everything and everyone is connected to some degree or other, I believe is really true. And that everything in the cosmos, the miracle of creation, of life. And yeah, I mean, we have been gifted with brains and technology and wealth and so forth in this country and other first world countries around the world. We really have to do something and not just talk about it. I mean, and I know he mentions it too, that there are some good things happening, but on a much smaller level. And I'm concerned, like, well, my children and my grandchildren, what's their world going to be like in 20, 50 years from now?
Certainly.
Hopefully we can find something to do. It's positive.
Hooray, go ahead.
Oh, well, this is just a little thing that occurred to me that this discussion of what we're doing with the land makes the decision that Doylestown Presbyterian made years ago when there was, they considered moving out of town, which would have meant taking up a big chunk of land to build a church with a big parking lot and, a whole nother site. And I don't know at that time that it was decided because of, environmental issues, but it was more like, we are a church of the town, we're going to stay in town. But how wise that turned out to be, to not move. And I'm also thinking that what can we do? Of course, we can change the way we live. It was as soon as the pandemic struck, I thought this is going to be terrible environmentally because there's going to be so much packaging, so much trash, so many, I vowed to order nothing remotely if I absolutely didn't have to. And but political action is really what we need to do. I mean, that's hard as it is. That's what we need to take as individuals, not just change our own lives, but try to get the larger, policies changed.
On the question, if we can really do anything, I think there are some thoughts that help us feel that it's not impossible. And if you look at the chapter, paragraph 59, someone from outer space looked at what we're doing. And 61 for the urgency, because Pope is saying so many people feel like, we're at the breaking point right now. And I think those two chapters give rise to see how serious we are damaging and how quickly we need to act. We should therefore have hope in that. I think that we can find solutions, because let's face it, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, even having to go to Congress the next day and declare war, people started acting very, very fast. Women working in airplane factories and all the rest. I mean, things just changed overnight. And I think that may have to happen, but it says to me also that there is hope if we try to start acting now.
Yeah.
Be on the hopeful side rather than the doomsday.
I think that's a great point, although we're in a current environment today where, like everybody thought after Sandy Hook, right? 20 first graders, 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds killed. We thought for sure something would finally happen with gun control, and it didn't, and January 6th insurrection, you would think that immediately, like, all sorts of things would have happened and laws would have been passed and security measures. I mean, and nothing happens. I mean, it's.
We didn't see it as being us. We need to see, since we're all interconnected in this network, we need to see that everything's happening is actually us. I'm breathing and putting out CO2. I mean, it's us. You've got to take responsibility for it, because it isn't a school shooting somewhere else. It was your own child here in Doylestown. I'm sure the people here would take
Yeah, I
very
don't
fast.
know. I mean, I had kids in school and I thought, my goodness, I mean, this is the nightmare that every kid, I mean, there's no wonder why there's incredible mental health issues among the young and the younger generations. It's because they grew up with school shootings and they grew up having to do drills, every single year, several times a day, active shooter drills. It's ridiculous. So it wasn't Sandy Hook, but I was very much impacted. And I was very concerned about my children in school. And frankly, for all of our safety, it could be anybody, right? We're in a church, churches are targets. So I don't know. I guess I'm really distraught with a huge percentage of the population in our country just refusing to see that it's an issue issue and refusing to change.
And Bill, you had mentioned paragraph 59. I wonder what people understand Pope Francis to mean when he says at the very top of that paragraph, at the same time, we can note the rise of a false or superficial ecology, which bolsters complacency into cheerful recklessness. So almost saying there's ways to act ecologically, or maybe to use the overused term sustainably, that are just kind of recycling the problem, if you will. And maybe we apply that, Judy, to your comment of not just superficial ecology, but superficial political ideology or superficial politics or
It's
economy.
sort of like the old, well, I drink Diet Coke, so I can, eat all the pizza and ice cream that I want, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I put out my recycling every week, so I can do what I do. Maybe is that what it means by superficial ecology?
Yeah.
One of the
My
things
point
that,
off is, again, trying not to see the problem, trying not to acknowledge it. We feed our own self-destructive vices. We know we shouldn't be, I got to lose weight someday, or I got to do this someday, you do it the wrong way.
just to reflect a minute on the
I think the key
throwaway
word there is
culture, on the throwaway culture. One of the things that I have become so aware of is how accepting we are of building an obsolescence, that things just aren't supposed to last. And I had a conversation with somebody the other day that said they were going to have to get a new refrigerator because their refrigerator was now 6 years old. And I thought, oh, and I remember inheriting a refrigerator that was 25 years old when I received it. And I had it for another like 20 years. And it was just, it did all the things it was supposed to do. And I think, like when I tried to say, oh, 6 years, you should be able to get much more out of that. They said, no, 6 or 7 years, maybe out of it. Our appliances aren't meant to last that long. And I thought, what's happening to all of those things that we're throwing out because we're getting a new one in 6 years or 10 years or
And
something when.
If you buy one that lasts for 35 years, you're gonna pay about $12,000 for it, and then, Sub-Zero.
This one I got free. And it was just one of those little refrigerators, but it lasted terrific.
Yeah.
And it did all the refrigerator was supposed to do.
Yeah. And if you look around town, there's so many junk removal, like 1-800-JUNK, and it's always, we make it disappear. So
Right.
the way I think about a lot of those things is they're atonement mechanisms, right? It's ways for us to, we feel guilty, right? We know that we're doing something, that this is, but we justify it, right? And we do this with our own kids. They don't need this toy, but Henry wants this Minecraft Lego set. And you're like, this Lego set will outlive us, who knows, how long into the future. And yet there's all sorts of mechanisms that say, no, just let's keep things going. And we can absolve you of, there's the priests of ecology that say, you are forgiven, we will take it away from you, right? So there's even that kind of sacramental element. And that's maybe, I see him, that's what he means by this kind of superficial ecology.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. You would get a more energy efficient refrigerator, but it's because, at what cost that you're throwing away the one that's still perfectly fine.
Sure.
But I think that's also built in
Right.
these days. They build them just so.
That's what I mean. And we've accepted
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We're saying,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's all it's supposed to last.
Right, we don't brag about it. We should.
There's even a guilt thing, because the new one is more energy efficient. It will use less electricity each year than the old one that you have. And people will pay you $50 if you give up a running, working
Right.
refrigerator to get a new one. So there's all these little
It's a-
guilt
Right.
trips,
That's that little, yeah.
manipulations,
It's that manipulation, right? Like I said, we really do have to think for ourselves. When I think, it's what is it? It's the new church that says, think for yourself, live for others. And you really do have to hear everything and digest what it means for yourself, which I have to remind myself all the time, because it's garbage, right? They tell us that, but it's garbage. We have to be willing to accept that.
And the things that don't last very long is bolstering the economy, because they're producing more and
Right.
more. So we're buying more and more. It has become a pastime is to go shopping. That's really, woo. That's a strange thing to say.
Yeah. Biden said in his address earlier today, I mean, one of the comments that stands out to me clearly relating to this is the best way to reduce inflation is to keep goods in production, the site, to get things back to normal. It's the same thing when George Bush says to shop, right? If we want to, this is the best thing we can do to strengthen the country. And yeah, it shows a kind of priority of the economic side of who we are that then becomes what we value most. Yeah.
So that's so interesting. And you were saying, what can we do besides reducing our consumption? Because that's sometimes out of our hands. We need jobs. People have a standard of living they expect to have. But if we were willing, and West Virginia at the moment is a standstill here, but if we were willing to train for different things, we have so many infrastructure projects, real bridges that need to be rebuilt, things that need to be established. If we were more flexible in the type of work we did, people could all be employed and still have resources to have a standard of living. It just wouldn't be in a job they expected or in the location they expected. And that's expectation setting for ourselves too.
And in paragraph 18, since we're on this kind of looking at goods and kind of the flow of goods and services, in paragraph 18, he uses this word repeatification, which I found really interesting. Just the idea that change is happening at a rate that is, just unprecedented, in part, as he'll say, because of technology. I think this is one of the things we see with heightened anxiety levels. One of the things it points to is just the social change and just how quickly things change underneath people's feet, especially young people who have to navigate these changes and are doing so as they're developing themselves, right? Like learning how to become adults. And I just wonder how do you see repeatification? We mentioned some things, but how has it impacted you, your friends, your family? And how do we connect that to what we've been discussing about throwaway culture? So how do you see repeatification connected to our own lives and also how its interconnection with throwaway culture?
I think the last sentence to that kind of answers that, where it says change is something desirable, yet it becomes a source of anxiety when it causes harm to the world and to the quality of life of much of humanity.
And I think that's individually as well as collectively. We all feel pretty stressed out in most of the things we have to do and where we have to be when and what has to be done before it can work.
I think there's change until something actually bumps up against us and knocks us down individually. You go, oh. And some of these horrific storms that are coming across the United States, people are starting to pay attention. This is climate change, folks, and they're starting to recognize that because their houses are being destroyed. And as awful as that is, this is maybe not such a bad thing for people to wake up.
Well, that's like when COVID began and people stayed home with their families. I mean, there were a lot of people that
did it together.
Yeah, everything slowed down. Everything reached a screeching halt. We were away. I drove back from North Carolina on that Friday, and things were it was the middle of March. I walked downtown from my house, and there was no movement. There were no cars on State Street. Nothing was open. It was like, like a whole other world, but people were home and they talked to each other. There was a day that spring, an unusually warm day, and my husband and I took a little walk into town. People sat on their steps out front and called hello to people. I mean, we had to slow down, but of course, when we don't have to, we tend not to. And this whole speeding things up and taking on more and rushing and trying to get more done. How do you put the brakes on? How do you say, no, it doesn't need to be done. No, we don't need to do everything. We don't need to consume everything. how do we slow down to get into a pace that is more compatible with the way nature has designed it?
I'm laughing at the irony for myself because I absolutely want to have that slowed down life in so many ways. I agree with you. And yet what we're talking about is speeding up our efforts to reduce climate change. And that's where I'd like to speed up. Slow down everything else, but let's speed up with this.
This is trade-off.
Yeah.
We want solutions to speed up. But yet individually, you want to slow down and appreciate the here and the now. I don't know, there will always be trade-offs, and I don't know how we can, unless you individually just commit yourself to doing what you know is right about keeping it clean, keeping it slower, and just taking time to smell the roses and so forth. If everyone will do, but I guess to get others who you know aren't doing it, you have to do it politically. That means what? At the grassroots level, becoming a firebrand and really, spending the time and the energy to go out and preach exactly what needs to be done and getting others to follow. Short of that, and I know I don't see myself doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think ideally more people should, step up and say, this, we have to do this, and we've got to stop doing that. Whatever the important things are, whatever the principles are, stick to them.
Yeah, and to our initial question, because having a 6 and a 2-year-old, these questions just race through my mind. Like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Right? We're raising these children, and we, like every parent, want to do it properly. And one thing I keep coming back to that we fail at often, because it's so hard to do, is just let's teach our kids to pay attention, right? And so we're like struggling with ourselves. And no, this is not anything against the education system, teachers, but just kind of even the efficiency model within education, in first grade, where everything is about measurability and something we can use this metric and compare ourselves against this district and this district. And the emphasis is not on, hey, that's a horseshoe crab and that's a blue jay, right? And yeah, this is how you read, and this is how you write. But even that, there's just a frantic pace to get them up to speed. And when you step back and say, like, this is a question we're asking, maybe you can help me figure out what we should do, but for what, right? Like, what are we getting them ready for? And do they have to read at the end of first grade? And if they have some problems, is that okay? If they love stories and if they love being read too? And so these are, but how do you, like, and Lorraine, I see here, like poetry, right? Like, how do we get them to learn how to, like just to read and to love learning. And I think the teachers I talk to have a hard time in that when they feel like they're fighting an uphill battle too. And so maybe one real tangible thing is to know that we're an example to the next generation too, in terms of our behaviors and habits. And if we're always distracted, how do we expect the generation coming up to not be distracted and pay attention? And if we don't know what this kind of oak tree is, right? Like I was a biology major and I couldn't identify most plants in my backyard. I knew a lot about the inner workings of the cell, but I didn't know when I was in a forest, I wouldn't know how to get out. I'd be lost, hopelessly lost. And there's something about that. Lori, sorry, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, how could you not know those trees? But a couple things occurred to me as this conversation was going on. We can try to influence others, but you're right, example is probably the best way, unless, we have, like when we're leading something or just this conversation, letting it happen as it happens, rather than making sure we have to get through the agenda for the night. It occurred to me when we were talking about paying attention has come up several times in this discussion. And, I think it was Mary Oliver, the poet, that many people know of her or know some of her work when they might not know most of contemporary poetry. But I think it was she who said, paying attention is a kind of prayer. And I also thought that, I was also thinking about the Old Testament, be still and know that I am God. that just being able to bring ourselves to stillness may not in itself change these things, but it might help us ready ourselves to act when we have the opportunity. But I must confess for myself, it's so easy to be discouraged. And I'm a chicken. I have 3 grandchildren. I have not, my sense is that if I were their parents, I would be, as I am as a grandparent, I would just be in fear for the future of their lives, of the way the world is going to be when the 5-year-old grows up, and so much so that I might engage more in dealing with the everyday emergencies, so-called emergencies, than being able to think hard about the future. But the kids do; they feel it. I work with children in schools, and I have for many years, and I've really seen the difference in the, say, post 9/11 children that have grown up in a world that they're much more aware of how fraught it is, and so they need all the stillness and love and understanding that anybody can give them. Whenever you're in contact with children, that's an opportunity to just bolster them through turning off, taking out your earbuds and turning off your phone, and it's so important.
One of the things, though, that is so important in school culture these days, though, is not just being free to discuss feelings or to discover things, but to check all the boxes on forms, because we don't want anyone to sue us. I mean, literally, I taught for 30 years, and everything has become so goal-based and so cold and measurable. And for anyone who read Anne of Green Gables, she would teach looking at things like you were saying, the things in the backyard. And
that's why you need to be subversive. No, I mean, I really mean that in the best sense. Any little opportunity to be subversive, and many teachers do, to their credit. They try so hard to nurture their students, not just to get them, up to certain scores, but honestly, they take a lot of risk doing that. Think of what was happening at our school board this whole past year.
John Lewis said, make good trouble.
Yep,
Do what
make good trouble.
part is right with your children and your grandchildren, really. If you're with a child or your grandchild, he or she becomes the most important thing at that time, is to, I guess, model the kind of behavior that you want him or her to, become, appreciating nature, one another, sharing and loving, that sort of thing. Snowy days, go out and enjoy this wonderful gift from God, that sort of thing.
I think we just coming out of Christmas season now, and I'm just continually struck by Jesus, where Jesus showed up, who he interacted with. Not very many people, right? Walked with them, went away at times, right? This is God deciding to rest and go, move away from the crowd at times. And it's just so fascinating that God, who could act and we believe will return, has chosen to act through us and chooses not to act without us. That's something really significant. And it's a mystery, right? That's, I think, what Pope Francis is driving at. We don't fully understand why. There's something beautiful, and there's an element of freedom in that tells us something of the nature of God. But yeah, it's a good example for us that we have an environment, we have a place in which we're situated, and I think we'll end today, not right now, when we get to the end. I want us to just be thinking about I'll have you write down 1 or 2 ways you're going to pay attention this week. Maybe some intentional practice to leave with, and the next week we'll check in and see how we did or what kind of changes that makes. But let me read before this next question, paragraph 52. If you turn to paragraph 52 in the book, it's on page 37. I'm just going to read the whole section. It says the foreign debt of poor countries has become a way of controlling them, yet this is not the case where ecological debt is concerned. In different ways, developing countries, where the most important reserves of the biosphere are found, continue to fuel the development of richer countries at the cost of their own present and future. The land of the southern poor is rich and mostly unpolluted, yet access to ownership of goods and resources for meeting vital needs is inhibited by a system of commercial relations and ownership which is structurally perverse. The developed countries ought to help pay this debt by significantly limiting their consumption of non-renewable energy and by assisting poorer countries to support policies and programs of sustainable development. The poorest areas and countries are less capable of adopting new models for reducing environmental impact because they lack the wherewithal to develop the necessary processes and to cover their costs. We must continue to be aware that regarding climate change, there are differentiated responsibilities. As the United States bishops have said, greater attention must be given to the needs of the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable, in a debate often dominated by more powerful interests. We need to strengthen the conviction that we are one single human family. There are no frontiers or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide. Still less is there room for the globalization of indifference. One of the things that bothers me about that paragraph is especially when it says the poorest areas and countries are less capable of adopting new models. It sounds to me, I don't know if this is what he's intending, but it sounds a little bit almost paternalistic, or like the developed country saying, hey, you can't do this new model. I would say that one of the things we might need to adopt, and I do think he's getting at this a little bit, is we could actually learn a lot from the quote unquote developing world, right? The world that we're trying to give Facebook to. We think if we can just get them, internet access, they can be just like us. And I say, no, look at what it does. And they're saying probably a lot of them the same thing. I don't know, but I would think, no, we don't really need this. But that idea of differentiated responsibilities really resonated with me, where the idea of achieving justice doesn't mean the same thing for everybody, right? And so that raises a question for us in our community. What do you see as our particular responsibility? Do you agree, first and foremost, with that statement, that there seems to be differentiated responsibility, that the West and the United States in particular needs to act in a way that is maybe more drastic than other countries? And then if we scale it to Doylestown, how do you translate that for our own environment or our own community?
Well, I think to the extent that I think this is part of the global conversations about, who has contributed the most to the dire situation of where we are today, and the countries that have been industrialized and consumerism driven have been disproportionately responsible, for the CO2 emissions, for the pollution, for the toxins, all of that. So I guess to me, that feels like a direct link, that if you were the country, the people, the citizens who contributed disproportionately, your responsibility will be different as well. And I think in response to your comment about the paternalistic comment, I think that I could definitely see how you read it that way. I also wonder though, like sometimes it's, in reference to, or I'm wondering if it is, that sometimes, a more, a cheaper or an easier to implement technology or solution, unfortunately, many times is, less environmentally friendly, right? So they can, if they have coal and they can burn coal and coal is cheap, right? And they're desperate for development. What are they gonna do? They're gonna go to the coal because it's gonna get them what they need sooner and faster. And they're just trying to catch up, and they're thinking, we haven't been putting out all this CO2 emissions for all these years. So, hey, we gotta get ours and we gotta get caught up. So.
Right. Or we have trees here, so that's what we're gonna, we have to cut them down and.
Yeah,
use them.
right,
That's a good
right.
point. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good way to read it.
Yeah, so.
I think we need to approach these problems without looking to the southern hemisphere, the poor among us, as being, oh, are we responsible for them and trying to navigate that or solve it? I think the sentence where the bishop's saying that on the end of that chapter, paragraph 52, is it? Where the bishop said the needs of the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable. We need to give more attention to that. It didn't talk about states or countries or anything else. I think the key thing that I got to take away from that was we need to strengthen the conviction that we are one single human family. Nature doesn't look at political boundaries or what part of the Grand Canyons in Colorado and what parts in Arizona and who has charge over the water where. I think when crises get big enough, finally you do act that way. But I think we need to learn how can we act that way within the rules and regulations and the powers that be. To try to approach these things. This is all of us, or it's the poor everywhere. It isn't the poor in some of the states in Africa, whether they're below the equator or above, or whether they're less developed in Europe. Or I think we've got to talk about Earth and the creation, and we're all members of it. Like we're all citizens of the United States. We're not just Pennsylvanians. You need to get rid of that whole concept of I belong here and you belong there. That's where you are and you can't do anything about it. Because we need to solve the problem by saying, well, it looks like we can't do anything about it, but maybe we can. We just never looked at that from that point of view. Maybe somebody from that side will come up and have an answer that you can't find.
There are a lot of smart people in poor countries.
There
are
very
IQs, and they can think. Just have to give them the opportunity for the education, we're all in this boat together. We've had infinite number of mentors and superheroes from the past, whether maybe it's your parents or grandparents, people like St. Francis, Jesus, the first, the greatest superhero. Just what would Jesus do? Just be like Jesus, just be kind and loving to the poor people, to the poor nations, be kind. And I think that there is a responsibility in the first world. I keep saying that the highly developed industrialized countries should be responsible for helping our neighbors in the southern hemisphere, the third world, second world. They do have that responsibility, just as the poor have responsibility to one another in their communities and in their families. Everybody's responsible for everybody else, to some degree or other.
That's so true, and that's never been more true than in the pandemic. And see how well we're doing in acting together as a community to care for each other. We're struggling with that, in our own country. We're among the worst, in terms of COVID response and reaction. We can't even get it together to get everybody to think one, to agree on the same facts, and then two, to say this is a community problem, this is a public health problem. How do we act together collectively to solve the public health problem? It makes me frankly really despondent about solving the climate problem, right? Because we can't agree to the facts. We can't agree to making this a collective community and ultimately global solution.
We'd still be looking at the soup if it's a solution or not from our point of view. It might be something else that is a good solution, and it isn't what we think is, or we didn't think of that. But there was a quote in a movie that I thought was really wonderful. Aged people and exporting our aged to nursing homes in third world countries like India. Probably know what the movie is about already. And it was they were running a hotel for the elderly.
The Marigold Hotel.
Yeah, the Marigold Hotel, right. And one of the people who was a big developer and head of a hotel chain that was putting big hotels in around the world for senior citizens to start your second life as a retiree and enjoy this and don't look to die, look to live and all this. And he came back to visit the place that they had asked for him to support and give some money. And he commented to the manager of the hotel and said, "You've done a wonderful work here. I don't know how you've done it, but you've done a wonderful piece of work and you've planted a lot of trees under whose shade you will never get to sit." And her answer was, "Others will, and that's what's important."
Yeah, very cool.
We just don't think that way. We just don't think that way.
The history part of developed and highly developed and underdeveloped nations and stuff makes me think of kind of the shape of the racial issue in our country, because 500 years of history has done so much damage, has limited so many opportunities, that we have a very, very complex problem right now. But the same thing is true in the countries in Africa, maybe parts of Southeast Asia or South America, where colonial powers just stole resources, where they set up governments. And, you know, there's just, so, and the big corporations now, or maybe, you know, Belgium doesn't control the Congo or whatever, but a coffee company has come in, and where people used to be able to provide their own food, you know, the land has all been stripped and their coffee plantations, and it's changed their whole economy, just like the potatoes and that England forced the Irish to grow. And then when they failed, everybody starved. You know, when a great big power gets in there and dictates their economy, and then they, years and years pass, it's so much to try to reverse, to overcome, and to feel, you know, to get everyone together and recognize our community when so much damage and limitation has happened over hundreds of years. So it's just a great big problem and a great big issue.
I want to be Debbie Downer for a minute. And I don't disagree with anything that anybody has said, and certainly the Western world that I have grown up in, with all the privileges and selfishness and greed and injustice that we have provoked on the world, is indisputable. But I do think we have to look forward. Recognize the past, but look forward. We passed over one section that I find particularly interesting, 50 on page 35. He talks about some can only propose a reduction in the birth rate economic assistance contingent on certain policies of reproductive health. Demographic growth is fully compatible with an integral and shared development. The blame population growth instead of extremely selective consumers on the part of some is one way of refusing to face the issue. I'm not disagreeing, but have you ever heard the saying that a pessimist is an optimist with more information? I like that too. And, you know, in some ways, I guess I'm a pessimist. And think some healthy pessimism about this whole issue is warranted. And I think narrowing solutions too much won't solve the problem. The problem's overwhelming. And he's a little dismissive here because it's a, it's a Catholic encyclical of population problems. And I don't think that's realistic. And I prefer to have some healthy realism as opposed to optimistic foolishness.
I laughed out loud when I read that. So I hear you. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, but let me just expand on that a little bit. I was born, I'm a baby boomer. In 1935, the world population was 2 billion. You know what it is today? Anybody know? 8 billion. 8 billion. In my lifetime, basically, the population of the world is quadrupled. That's not sustainable. And this paragraph would suggest that, oh, don't look at that. I don't think we can help but look at that. And, Africa, we've been talking about Africa and the poverty in Africa. Africa now, as I looked this up because I was curious to know, but it's about 1.1 billion people. It is forecast by the end of this century, to have grown to over 4 billion. Now, if you ignore that, you're not going to solve the problem. And, maybe I'm being a pessimist about whether we can solve the problem, but you can't just sweep that aside. And I'm going to use a term that is kind of charged, I guess, here, but family planning. I don't think it does any service to the population of Africa to just ignore this and go ahead and we had our time with excess. Now you go ahead and have your time with excess because, well, frankly, nature is replete with examples where excess doesn't come out. Excess population or whatever. We know that. Lemmings into the ocean, and, you take out key species and the ecological system fails. And eventually, animals or whatever critters reach either starvation or predation to the point where they don't exist. So all I'm trying to say is that, well, we need to look, I think, at population. The Pope doesn't. I think he's got an excellent book here in all regards, except that he's ignoring something that we ignore at our peril. And I personally think family planning is just a no-brainer. And it's to the benefit of the people who would, what's the population of many African countries? 50% or more are under the age of like 22. Well, what if people that are young like that do in life? They procreate. And their traditions are you want a big family because that'll help secure your future. Plus a lot of kids die, so you have a whole bunch of kids. Well, I don't think that's a good way to go into the future. And I just think that this problem is not solvable if we don't look at all sides. And as much as I'm willing to say that, I'm part of a system of fault and excess and greed and selfishness, I don't think we do a favor to those coming behind us if we say, okay, now it's your turn. You can go ahead and do what we did, make the same mistakes. Because the planet won't survive. And it's all tied together. All this stuff is tied together. I'm preaching, excuse me. You can't look at just population or at global warming and the environment or, loss of habitat. It all comes together. The more people, the more strain on the environment, the less we can grow food, the more the environment gets worse. So anyway, I don't know where this is going, except to say, I think unfortunately we're focusing too much on, happy, it's our fault, and not enough on, there's a disaster coming if we don't get real.
When I read that, I was kind of startled And I thought, well, the Pope isn't God. He's fallible and makes mistakes and sins just like the rest of us. But I wondered, do you think isn't it maybe his Catholic upbringing that put the emphasis on, no birth control and all that, that's just coming through there, that he's afraid.
Well, but I think he's got a responsibility as all of you to look forward and what works in the future, not what works in the future. I mean, be fruitful and multiply. What was that? 4,000 years ago? And there were 50 million people or something like that in the world. Now we've got 8 billion. Well, new solutions are necessary. And the fault I have isn't with most of this book, but it's primarily with that paragraph. Because therein lies, to me, the key to actually improving the situation versus letting it slide and feeling good about it with attention. I hear people say, it's all we get what happens in the fall. It doesn't matter. Obviously, it doesn't matter.
I agree, we can't do that, but it's absurd, but it's a solution. If you got rid of 6 billion people on the planet tomorrow, things would be a lot better as far as the ecology of the planet.
So there is that
I'm not
relationship.
saying that blaming me for everything or blaming the US or blaming England or Colombia. No, we don't have time to blame people. We have time to act as one people under God on this planet. And I think that outweighs whatever we have.
That's time for 1 or 2 more comments, either related to what we're talking through now, or if there's anything we didn't discuss that you really would like to express, or maybe prepare us for next week. Now is your chance.
So I have accepted that it's going to get worse. I've had to come to grips with that, or else I lose sleep at night. And so it's what can you do in your lifetime? And, education, to your point, makes such a big difference in family planning. And when you visit African countries where education is available, especially to the young women, maternal health improves. And so they lose less children, and therefore they have less children. And so it's not something that will curtail the problems that we have, because generations take an awfully long time, but it certainly helps, right? And so the positive side for that, on me, it is education. And we're going to lose a lot. There's so many things I've never seen, so many things my nieces will never see. But if we keep building in these, we'll preserve something. And in the end, I do believe the earth will win. We will die. We will cause our own destruction, and the earth will regenerate. I believe God made that capability. So we may miss out on it if we don't act. But I think the earth will. Our loss.
Well, I like that because you propose something that changes the future. Whereas I was just a pessimist.
You were being a realist. You were being a
Well, I'm
realist.
a realist, but I didn't have any real answers except for family planning. But education,
It's just slow.
Well, I
It just
think
doesn't
it's-
help.
It's
It's slow.
education, but it's also thinking about how do you provide a safety net for everybody, right? So that people don't feel like they need to procreate more in order to secure their future, right? So it's a safety net for people at every age, but especially a safety net for elderly and honoring our elders and caring for our elders without sending them off to the Magnolia Hotel, And I think that to your point, everything's interconnected. So it does require a very interconnected, multifaceted solution.
I think education is the answer for climate problems also. If we get more information out, the facts out, not unfactual.
An example of that, there's been all of this education and information that's been put out there about the bees and the pollination of bees. And New Jersey has just written their, it's not everything, it's not perfect, but any public areas bars, golf courses, anything owned by the actual state of New Jersey, they're not going to use the chemical that kills bees. They haven't banned it yet. You can still go to your Home Depot and buy the stuff and put it on your own lawn. But it's a start. And I think that was encouraging, and it was education. We just, they just blasted. If we don't do something about this, people, there's going to be no crops. We're going to have, such hunger problems. So I think, I think you're right. But we have to, the governments have to really just constantly be bringing this up and talking about it. So New Jersey, good for them. Pennsylvania
That's
should
good
be
to
doing,
hear.
Pennsylvania should be doing that. It should just be like a domino effect. But wishful thinking sometimes.
I can't think of the girl's name that was in Sweden that started out.
Greta.
Greta, yes. And she was just one person. But she started getting the message out.
Yes. I think sometimes I understand what you're saying. This is such a huge complex problem. Not sure if you don't just take that first step, nothing's going to change. Right? So, yeah.
I had a question. The thing that bothers me is that our church is working hard to equip us, not only Matthew 25, but to give us the resources, the teachers, as yourself and other professionals in the field, to help us petition our local leaders, political leaders, social NGOs that are trying to provide safety nets, petitioning the government. Maybe we're writing to the wrong people. We're wanting to get the message. Should we not be trying to send our letters to the General Assembly and say, we need PCUSA to mobilize all the Presbyterians and just to get on buses and go to Washington and carry the flag and let them see us visibly? Can we do that? Why is it wrong if we can't? And if it is wrong, if it works.
It's not wrong, but one of the issues we do face, that poor John Willingham has to face, is trying to keep the body together. You'll hear him allude to that, not all that directly, but he obviously is very conscious of it. And there are certain people in this church that are simply not interested. And he doesn't want to, it's a big tent thing. He doesn't want to lose those people by taking positions and doing things that they don't agree with, so they run off and join some evangelical church somewhere.
I understand that 100%, but I'm trying to get it where it's taken from this church and coming from way up there. It's not Doylestown Presbyterian Church. Those of us want to could participate in that without changing what we do.
Well, I think it's a wonderful idea, but the way I understand the Presbyterian church works is it's so consensual and democratic.
I would love to see it not just a Presbyterian church, but just people, no matter what your religious affiliation is or not.
You use the skills, but
This is not a Christian issue.
I was thinking I'd get on the bus. I got a bus, I'd get on the bus. Sure.
Let's get a bus. We'll get provide lunch.
I'd like to see us do that.
I think you're right, and probably, I just wanted to throw it out there as a question. I've got a son who's very successful in monetarily. And without mentioning that, right, $6 million a year in salary. I talked to him about problems of inequality and the poor and all this, and I tried to tell him from my Christian background, I'm telling you, not what I'll tell other people. I believe this. It's because of what I read in the Good Samaritan story and who your neighbor really is. He was in far off land. all the rest of it. His answer to me was, I agree with you with everything you said, Bill, but if you're going to go out and talk to other people about this, leave religion out of it, because that turns him off. He doesn't.
And leave politics out of it too.
Well, he's
Just go from the heart, what
Yeah.
you know is right.
yeah.
Yeah.
That didn't bother him so much because he had recently made a change, his son made a change, my grandson. And he happens to be number 2 person under the CEO. It's a pharma company that invents drugs for the diseases that are rare diseases to help people with nobody else, because it's not market. And the model his CEO used when they're not hiring enough people of color in research, he said, look, we'll go out and try to find them. There aren't that many and we can't find them. What can we do? He said, here's what we do. We take the money we make and we set up scholarships and fellowships for really good people, education of the kind, and then go hire them when they graduate. And we'll have the people we need, and we'll meet those things, and we'll have better scientists than we do now.
That's
And
good thinking. That's smart.
his CEO happens to be gay. And that changed his mind about a lot of things, but he's not going to say no to him. He had too much vested interest.
We can say in politics, other people get hurt by what you say politically. And if we can get politics out of this and just worry about passion in the heart.
Unfortunately, that word we need to take out of it. The true definition of politics, and correct me, Craig, I'm not a liberal arts person.
I couldn't tell.
Is the art of compromise, the art of working together to achieve the goal that will give the greatest good to the greatest number. It doesn't satisfy everybody 100%. That's a noble quest to go after. I think we think of the failures in politics. Fail most of the time.
There are a lot of good things happen politically.
Yes.
And because of good politics, good people, you
Yes.
have the Constitution, you have all these great things. You know, the Civil Rights Act and so forth. I mean, you know,
But it's in school boards, it's in universities, it's not just Congress, right, or your local politicians. Political motivations and unions and everything else. This is the way we are. And we can get around that or accept it. Let's move on. Let's try to solve this problem.
Yeah, let's pick up with that next week. This idea, because I think what we're getting at is everybody has things that they hold dear. They're kind of their central axioms, if you will, that guide what they understand as meaningful and what gives them purpose. Maybe there is something that we appeal to there. And the question is, how do we do that within the political, economic realm, et cetera? So we can return to that question. I think it's some great points raised. Before we leave, the one thing I'd encourage you to, kind of the homework assignment, in addition to your reading, is just to think of just one real tangible way that you're going to pay attention this week. Whether that's taking time to learn those tree species in your backyard, to learn how to name 3 new trees, whether it's reading and focusing on the same poem all week, and just kind of letting an ecological poem speak to you, maybe something by Mary Oliver that was mentioned, or something else. Thinking of somebody that you may want to call that you haven't in a while and start up a conversation and build those social networks, and then start to think about that question that we began with, which was, what is your environment? What do we regard? Where do we feel most at home? And why do we feel most at home there? And how is that connected to what we understand about what our environment is? And I'll be curious, in addition to Bill, what you left us with, we can see what effect that has on you, what you participated in or paid attention to. And we will focus on chapters 2 and 3 next week, Wednesday. Let me just close in a brief word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. I look forward to seeing you all a week from now. Almighty God, we thank you for a chance to meet with one another and for the encouragement that we can be to one another in discussing these very difficult, complex, and often mysterious issues. We pray that you would guide all of our efforts, that you would guide our thoughts and activities this week. Help us to be the community that you would like us to be. Help us to embody the vision that you have for humanity and for the world. And we pray that we would honor you in all that we think and say and do. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. And,
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg.
Bye, thank you.